All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol. And we have a somewhat Inception-like podcast guest today. So to my left is Adam Janke. He is the founder of both the Journal of Mountain Hunting and the Beyond the Kill podcast. And an interesting fact that any of the OG listeners of the Mindful Hunter podcast will know. You'll know that I originally started this podcast on a different channel. What you might not know is that the Mindful Hunter podcast would never have existed if it wasn't for Adam. And I had actually sat on the idea for probably a couple of years. I thought about doing it long before it would have been appropriate for me to even do it. But it was one of those things that I always told myself, the space is crowded. We don't need another middle of the road hunting podcast. There's no point. And then Adam had asked me to do a podcast on their channel. Audiences didn't really mesh. That's not a big deal. In fact, that's might be an interesting topic for later, because I think that's actually a good thing, that there is a defined taste to audiences, and we have some crossover, but not all crossover. But I just wanted to give a nod of the cap to Adam, because it turned out to be one of the best things that's ever happened. I've had the Mindful Hunter for a long time. I've done a lot of film. I've done a lot of Instagram, but I can say nothing I have ever done has generated the level of engagement that a podcast has. And we were talking beforehand about different elements of, the meta components of a podcast. And I think it's because people get to listen to you so much. I don't know, but I have to thank Adam for that. So real quickly. So Adam's a pretty diehard hunter. I've been on his podcast. I've talked about my history a little bit. We were texting with each other, kind of post both of our sheep hunts, and we're like, oh, we need to have a catch up. I was like, well, if we're gonna have a catch up, might as well create some content while we're doing it. So the initial point of this podcast was really just to talk sheep and see how the two hunts were. And then the more I got thinking about it, I've been meaning to have Adam on for a while. I have like kind of the light version of the background of the Journal of Mountain Hunting and the light version of Adam's own background. But as much as we can stay on track here, we're going to try and do like a half history of Journal, Beyond the Kill, Adam, and then half kind of sheep update. So thank you for joining us, Adam, and thank you for the inspiration to start my podcast.
Oh man, my pleasure on both fronts. I don't have many superpowers, maybe none, in fact. But one of my I guess talents is I can spot talent. I actually, and I say that like it's not really the way I want to come out of the gates and sound like a bit of a Delta Bravo here, but there's a lot of guys I've encountered in this space who I've kind of given a nudge, I guess I would say, and a strong nudge, because they needed it, quite frankly. And you were one of them. And I love seeing people who are passionate about things, find, their voice or an addition to their voice or their platform. And let's say in your case with the, the YouTube stuff you're doing beforehand. And yeah, man, like I really enjoy that part of, and goes to some of my other work in other spaces as well. As
right.
Seeing others do well and be empowered to do stuff is fun. And I really feel that way about people coming into the backcountry or mountain hunting space as well, which kind of comes back to part of the story as it relates to the, why I started the Journal of Mountain Hunting and then eventually the Beyond the Kill podcast as well. So long-windedly, what the fuck else is new with me? I can drop bombs, right?
Oh yeah. This is the full big E.
Good
podcast.
Yeah.
Well, and I find it particularly interesting because you are not the typical, and I don't want to bandy around like content creator, influencer, but for a guy who's created what you've created, you do very little self-promotion. Like you don't even have a personal Instagram, do you?
I do. Yeah. I think the last post was like, I don't know, probably a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah. It's actually, it's fun. I to go back in there because there's actually, some, the first hints of what kind of, or the fire that was burning within me to go and do something like the Journal of Mountain Hunting.
Yeah.
You'll actually see that in an Instagram back before there were stories, like just like a picture with a really long bit of text. Like my one of my first, actually, I think it was my first fly-in trip to northern BC. So that's on my personal Instagram, a bunch of other stuff as well. But it fizzled out, and I've got a love-hate relationship with social,
Sure.
which is part of the reason why I don't do a lot of self-promotion. But that's a big part of, the story of the journal of mountain hunting as well, is how I felt about it being a representation of, me, the wanting to be a great white hunter, which I'm being tongue in cheek there. I wasn't trying to be, never wanted to be, versus an outlet for those that, at the time I wouldn't have known to call it adventure hunting, but that had that passion that I know you have as well.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get right into it. You're an Ontario boy, like I'm an Ontario boy.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that, we don't have to dive super deep, but give me the kind of 30-second background. What was your hunting experience coming from a hunting family, not coming from a hunting family,
mm-hmm.
and what and when finally brought you out to BC? Because from what I know, there's a bit of a transition at that point as far as hunting styles and goals and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did grow up in a hunting family. My dad was not a hunter. He'd done a bit of it, growing up. It just never caught the bug. He's as obsessive a fly fisherman. Well, fisherman, but now in the last probably 15 years, fly fisherman as I am a mountain or backcountry hunter. So he wasn't one of my hunting mentors. My mom's side of the family, she has 4 brothers. They all lived in within 5 minutes of where I grew up. So I grew up in a rural area, hour west of Ottawa, close to, not really in the town, but close to a town called Douglas, Ontario. So if anyone wants to look it up, you can find it on a map. Farm sort of area. I used to joke that, you could switch out the Canadian flags for American flags and change everyone's, accents to a Texan accent, and you would not skip a beat.
Okay.
For where I grew up. And I loved it. And it was just, there were only, I guess technically as this time wore on, 4 things I cared about, and not in any particular order: sports, chicks, hunting, and fishing. That was it.
Love it.
And at varying points in life, they, certain things would rise to the top, other things would descend to the bottom, right? But it was just there's nothing that really and truly I caught the bug for, like hunting. I love to fish, but just for as long as I can remember, the idea of walking in the woods with a gun and whatever that was. So I did a lot of upland, grouse hunting. We had a lot of gun dogs, in the extended family. So spent a lot of time doing that. A little bit of waterfowl, not really a shit ton of white-tailed deer hunting, as everyone does in Ontario that grows up in those sort of environments. Wolves. We hunted wolves in the winter. I've got some, pretty cool, I think, formative stories for, the man I eventually became because of hunting wolves and the things my uncles made me do to try and get wolves. It was, I was one of those guys, right? You've talked about it. There's the adult onset hunter, and then there's the person who grows up with it. So
yeah,
that's how I grew up. It was just part of life, really.
So what and when brought you out to BC?
So I moved to BC, Vancouver specifically, in 2006. And that was 2 things: mountains. And at the time, not hunting. I'd actually taken a bit of a break from hunting. I moved to Southern Ontario for university to do my degree. It was a 8+ hour, bit of travel to get home and hunt. There was probably hunting where I was at university, but I didn't know anybody who was doing it. And
the schedule also kind of sucks because most of the fall, you're just getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah.
Reading week, now there's nothing going on. Shut down for Christmas there's not and then you got summer off. So it really does, unless you're living directly in a hunting community where you can hunt weekends or take off after work, or maybe do some stand hunting before classes. The university life does not lend itself to hunting for most people.
Yeah. I mean, if I'd gone to University of Ottawa or Queens or something like that was, an hour to 2 from home, absolutely would have kept it up. But I didn't. I went to Western, and that was far enough away from home that I just, didn't make the trip home very often. Frankly, it was Christmas was kind of it. And then of course in the summers. But that's a long way of saying I took a break from hunting. And when I moved to BC, it was for the mountains, but it was for the mountains for skiing and snowboarding and hiking and all that sort of stuff. And then work. I was coming to work specifically for a company that I'd interviewed with when I was back in Ontario, but that was before remote was really a thing, and the interview just didn't click, didn't land. And then I flew out, showed up for a second interview, and got the job. So at the time, I was wanted to kind of really embrace the mountain. So I got into downhill mountain biking, got the trail running bug, and went a little bit too far down that rabbit hole and got into really long distance stuff, which just happened to coincide with me. Just one day I'm like, fuck, I need to hunt again. Like it just came like surging back. And which led to all sorts of research about BC, which, I knew some stuff about growing up, like who doesn't see something from BC in a hunting magazine or a hunting TV show or something like that. But I hadn't really thought about it for a long time. And so when when the fever set in again, and I started to really think about hunting in BC and research, all the opportunities, I realized the land of opportunity that I had found myself in. And, the hockey stick curve just went from there, really, as far as obsession and everything else.
So were you, because you're in Kelowna these days, but were you still in the mainland or lower mainland then, or when did the transition up there occur? And how does that fit in with your kind of hunting story?
So, it was, I don't even think I was there a year when the hunting bug and fever set back in. So it was the fall. It would have been my first fall. So I moved in January. So I just missed, well, technically I didn't miss a hunting season at the time. I didn't know I could go over the counter for goats somewhere, but as far as I
had to wait 6 months anyways.
That's right. So it was the next fall. And I went on a backcountry, air quotes for those who can't see, mule deer hunt, which was amazing. It was up in Region 5, the Chilcotin, storied mule deer, area, and drove way back in on back roads to this classic ranching area that a lot of people know, Empire Valley, which has produced absolutely monstrous bucks going back decades. It's sort of a must do for anyone who likes mule deer in BC, or was at the time. That's back in 2007 now. And so, it just set in, right? So for me, it started with mule deer because I was a whitetail hunter growing up. The idea of these big, candelabra mule deer racks had always, fascinated me. And then I really wanted to get into elk. So I started to look at, the Kootenays and those sort of places. And then I'll remember this so well. I picked up a BC Outdoors magazine, flipping through the pages, and I see this article about northern BC. And these guys go in by jet boat for a 2-week hunt. They come out with 3 6-point elk and 3 stone sheep. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. I want in.
Where the fuck?
Yeah.
And that was,
I haven't found it yet. I keep going.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so like, of course you think about bighorns. I didn't even know what a stone sheep was when I moved to BC, right? I absolutely knew what a bighorn was. So this idea that there's this, other species of sheep in this epic backcountry, like super remote area, that changed everything, right? Like I mean, of course hunted, sort of south of PG, back into Region 5, over into the Okanagan, up in the Coast Range. Like I got as much hunting in as I could, hunting out from the Lower Mainland. But from that point on, from reading that article on, there was only one direction, and that was north. And that's when the real like sickness set it, where like I knew this was more than just like, oh yeah, I like to do this once a year. No, there was just something that, like a magnetism to it, that I couldn't really get over.
I think lots of people
for good or bad
can relate. And it was funny, and I don't mean to skip ahead, but me and Spencer, my hunting partner this year, I had 2. One guy had to go home early. We can get into that later, but we were like on day 13 and we didn't even want to come home. What we said was it'd be great to like go have a hot shower and eat a steak.
Yeah.
And then we'd go right back out. And there was lots of reasons why most people wouldn't have wanted to do that. But I do think it's an inexplicable Yeah, it falls in line with like addictions and obsessions, and it's an irrational behavior because when you explain it objectively, it doesn't, people understand going to Hawaii. People understand, going to Mexico. When you tell people what you do with your time off, unless they're into it, you just get a lot of kind of blank stares and quizzical looks.
Well, and it's, and by no means whatsoever am I comparing myself to the people that explored or prospected or trapped or whatever. Like it's sort of the turn of the 20th century. Because if I learned anything on my most recent sheep hunt, is I'm not nearly as fucking tough as I thought I was. But I kind of challenge it's of course it's irrational in a modern construct or context, but there were people who, this is how a lot of people from all parts of Europe settled in Canada, right?
100%, man.
Came here, they got on a train, and then they got on a horse or they walked and they found a patch of land and they settled it, right? And so I do sometimes wonder if that's just in some people and not in others, and that's totally good. Right?
I always like to say, man, some of us were hunters and some of us were gatherers. Like you're right. This is not necessarily meant for you, and if it is meant for you, there's not a whole lot else that's going to do this for you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that, in I guess in a roundabout way, coming back to the Journal Mountain Hunting and the Beyond the Kill podcast, that was always one of the, I wouldn't call it a theme or an underpinning, but there was just something there, right? That was there. There was nothing at the time when I started it, which was 7 years ago, just this month. There was nothing out there that sort of satisfied that itch when you weren't out there.
Yeah.
In the mountains, right? Like there was the building Kuyu blog. There was a Sitka, newsletter that would come out with a story pretty randomly. Podcasts weren't really a thing at the time. Yep. There's a few out there, but they weren't what they are today. And so, I was just, because I had to learn, like I wasn't a born and raised mountain hunter. I was having to learn to be able to go and do these things I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do it and I was going to figure it out. And between fitness and grit and sheer stubbornness, I was going to figure it out. But there just wasn't a really good single source of information, right? There was the forums, Hunting BC and Rock Slide and, a few other options out there. But there was no single source catered to this like mountain or backcountry world. And I had gone through transition. I moved out, just rewinding a little bit, moved out to work for a company. Within less than a year, I decided that I could do it better than they could, just young guy full of piss and vinegar. So decided to branch off on my own and started my own business in the clinical space, and had sold that 5.5 years later, and was going through the whole transitional, thing you do when you sell a company, when you're helping the buyer, make sure things go well. And I was looking for something new, looking for a new project. And I remember this quite well. We're driving down to Portland. My in-laws are in Portland. And we just had our first kid, my eldest son. And we're driving down in the evening in like the fall. So hunting's of course on the brain. I'm looking for this new thing to do. And I'd read the 4-Hour Work Week and I was going like, oh, I'm going to try this to design a product and blah, 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 all this bullshit. Right. So I've got, 4-Hour Work Week bouncing around between my ears. I've got fall. So, hunting season is, full on for me. Just had a kid and knew I didn't want to be at the mercy of, my income being related to my presence in a room. Cause as a clinician, that's the way it is. Right. Sure. I'd hired some people to work for me. So I'd had a little bit of separation from that, but by and large it was, if I'm there, I make money. If I'm not there, I don't make money. And so, kid, fall, 4-Hour Work Week, we're driving down to Portland. My wife's dozing off, the kid's asleep. And this idea of an online magazine just kind of, pops into my head. And the rest I kind of just figured out from there. Didn't know how to build a website, didn't know shit about, media or advertising at all. But just decided that, I'd at least get it started, like kind of get something up and live and see if it pulled any interest and then make a decision from there. And I remember the day we went live with it in like 8 hours. We had 1,000 people sign up like with their emails.
That's crazy.
Which isn't a huge number, right? In the internet.
That is a huge number though. And maybe it's part of the times. But like I do some pretty successful online things from time to time, like a little video will hit or some things, and getting 1,000 emails, because like that's what people don't realize today. Like getting somebody to passively ingest content is one thing. Having them actively engage with that content is another thing. And then there's tiers of engagement. Like hitting a like button would be like down here. Getting an email address or a repost is like up here. So to have something that you put online and then get 1,000 emails, that is a very big deal. That really speaks to to how it spoke to them. So what did that actually look like? Like what was 1.0? What did you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when I decided I wanted to do this, I had a couple buddies who, I had said, hey, you want to be a part of this, whatever. And both like, yeah, sure. Sounds cool. And, they eventually decided that one, it's kind of the way you described yourself actually in your post sheep hunt podcast. You're too much of you don't suffer fools very well. Right. Yes. And my buddies aren't fools.
I don't suffer fools lightly.
Yeah. My buddy, the two buddies that were involved, they're far from fools. But, I just wanted to do it my way and at my pace and with my level of passion for it. And I was, it was, my idea. And so I was super committed to it. And they read the tea leaves to see that I was going to run through every concrete wall that was put in front of me to make this happen. And they just didn't want to come along for that ride.
Yeah.
They had 2 good jobs and they were fine. Right. Not that I didn't have a good job. I was working for the company at the time, but I'm more suited to being self-employed. We'll put it that way. So anyways, 1.0, I didn't know how to make a website. So I find one of these, I think Weebly was the one I settled on, one of the drag and drop like email or web page builders, and came up with like, I can't remember, it was 3 or 4 pages, but it was basically a promise of what's to come. Right. So I, looked up, one of the first steps was I look up this idea of the Journal of Mountain Hunting or journalofmountainhunting.com. It was available. I'm like, hell yeah, I'll take that.
That's amazing. The name is so good. Your podcast name is so good too. I'm a little bit pissed. They're both really good. Like they do, and I actually owe credit to my mother-in-law for the Mindful and Mindful Hunter, which is a story we can get into later. But I'm very happy that I have a brand name that like communicates something with only a couple of words. And it's rare that people do that. Like I can name 50 other content creators whose name really has nothing to do with the content that they put out. And for you to have 2 specific products and for them both to have such good names is like, well done, man. It's not easy.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And right back at you on Mindful Hunter. Step 1, lock in the domain. And then, as I said, I looked at a few different web page builders. It was settled on this Weebly because it was frankly the easiest. And it was, homepage with this effectively like a mission statement on it, some cool imagery that I was able to, source, beg, borrow, and steal to keep my my cost to an absolute minimum.
Yep.
And then I had very much like I really thought of it as an online magazine, right? So it would come out once a month with set columns, right? And so there was, the homepage, there was a description of the type of content that was going to be in there, from stories to fitness to gear. All of the things that we all talk about now. But again, there wasn't a single source option for that, that at least wasn't attached to a brand at the time.
And online, like you did have some models in the print space.
Sure.
But not online and
Exactly.
not, what's the word I'm looking for? Not as authentic or not as organic. Like all the stuff in the magazines we've all learned now is all bought and paid for and advertorial kind of.
And a big, sorry to cut you off. A big
go.
Part of that too was long form.
Right.
Like print is such that.
Now, is that something you got from Ferris too? Because he loves the idea of the long form written content.
No, the big thing I got from Ferris, and I should take a little tangential story here because I remember the first time somebody mentioned 4-hour work week to me, and I'm like, you fucking pussy. Like I'm a Scottish, German, Irish Presbyterian. I'm not, a religious guy, but you put those 4 things together, and what do you get? You get there by hard work, and that's about it. right? So this idea that somebody, could or even wanted to only work 4 hours per week, to me was ridiculous. So that, predates me reading the 4 Hour Work Week by years. I don't remember the time frame. But the funny thing is, you have a kid and you're like, I want to spend every moment with that kid I can. So the big thing I got from Ferris was, one, all these barriers that you think exist out there in terms of why you can't start something. Really just don't exist. And that's, evolved even further since he first came out with that book. I mean, obviously. And the second part was, nothing matters unless you experiment. Like, validate.
Yeah.
So don't spend a ton of money or a ton of time building something or going to a print magazine. Like, let's say that was my idea. I want to do a print magazine. Well, that's a lot of cost and energy and effort. So test it online in the most simple way you can and see if it has legs, right? And so 1.0 was this promise for long form content, and a variety of like primary subjects that would get covered, and that's about it. Like that was kind of it on this 1.0, whatever it is, 2 to 4 pages, and that still pulled in that.
So it was just a shell. You didn't even have any content when you first launched, and you still got 1,000 signatures, 1,000 emails.
Yeah.
Wow. Great.
It was
so how did you launch? Like, how did they find out?
I worried you were going to actually ask me this. So, you got to break a few rules to validate, right? And I was actually thinking about this last night when you asked, you texted me and said, like, hey, do you mind talking about the foundation of the journal? I just had this feeling you're going to ask me this. So I seeded it on forums, and it goes against most forum rules, promoting. And so what I actually did was pull the, hey, have you guys heard about this thing? And I think I'm still blacklisted from Alberta Outdoors for this one. So if you've got some Alberta listeners, they might have a chuckle. I can't remember the guy's name was Silver Tip or Silver Line or something like that. He outed me and went into the back end, pulled my name as registrant of the Journal of Mountain Hunting because I hadn't set up privacy stuff. It was pretty comical in hindsight. But the reason I did that was I didn't want to do the, hey guys, please check out my thing. Yeah. I wanted it to be as objective as possible.
Right.
And so, I seeded it on some forums. I reached out at the time straight to Jason Hairston at Building Kuyu, or at Kuyu, when he had the Building Kuyu blog, asked if I could put it up on there. He was like, hell yeah, man, this is awesome. Go for it. I'm sure I'm forgetting some other people who gave me access to some of their company, forums and etc. But that was kind of it. There was no no Facebook advertising, no Instagram, I didn't know shit about any of that stuff.
Okay.
What I knew were forums.
But that's the thing, man. In the heyday, the forums were so good.
Exactly.
For everything that I've been into, whether it was jujitsu or bodybuilding. At the heyday, forums, you had such access, and it was people who gave a shit. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Really gave a shit that you would get. Still one of the biggest drivers of views for my videos, and I do it very sparingly. The only video is Hunting BC. You can track the stats, and I get when I post a hunting video on Hunting BC, a significant portion of my views come from Hunting BC. So that's very interesting. And we're kind of, and I can say, and I'm sure you realize too, as it's gotten easier to get access to people, it's gotten harder to get their attention.
Yeah.
So even though now I can touch base with you in 200 different places, the odds of you actually noticing that I'm getting in touch with you, I've actually gone through a bit of a revamp recently. So I just dropped this Backcountry nutrition guide and did it in exchange for email addresses because I was having a conversation with a mentor. And he was like, man, you're a victim of all the platforms you're on. And especially with the way the algorithms work, just because you post something on Instagram doesn't mean people are going to see it. And just because you put up a new YouTube video doesn't even mean it's going to show up in your subscribers' home list. And so I'm almost going backwards. I did all of this, and now I'm starting a newsletter email list because I want to have control. And for people who want to follow me, I want them to be able to listen, I'll send you one email a month. And that way you don't have to worry if you're missing anything and all the cool stuff you might want. So I think it's funny how we're almost coming full circle in that whole discussion. Okay. So we launch in business world. You have now ascertained that you have product market fit. You have an idea. You built an MVP, and I actually want to do an entire podcast on the concept of MVP, because I'm just real quickly, minimum viable product is what you're supposed to build when you go to test a concept. And what most people interpret it as is the smallest possible version. And that's where most people get off the rails. It's actually the smallest possible version that still contains the essence or the ethos of what it is you're trying to communicate to your audience. Like if you had just had one page with black and white text, it probably would have failed, because that's not a true MVP. You needed something with some like cool imagery and something that would inspire confidence and let people know what was coming down the pipe. And that's something I'm really passionate about in my like real consulting world, is that when we go to test things, we got to make sure we're actually, and even funnier, when we launched the Mindful Hunter podcast, you were like, yeah, however often you want to do it, maybe it's once every other week or whatever frequency. And I said to you, I think the MVP is once a week for a year, because I think you need to offer people that type of consistency for that length of time to find out if you have product market fit. And I can say that, go ahead.
Especially at this point in time, right? Like timing is so critical that, I mean, it's such a cliched or like obvious thing to say, but that still doesn't detract from the immense like import of timing. Like if I were to launch, and I now have a business partner with in the whole media entity, because the podcast and the journal are all under one corp. And I have a business partner in that. He and I talk about this all the time. If you were to try and start the Journal of Mountain Hunting today, I don't think I could do it. Like, I don't think I could, with the skills I had, like if we took the skills I had then and imported them to now, and I tried to do it now, I don't think it would have any legs. Or
I don't disagree, man. You would need a digital marketing specialist in order to have any hope whatsoever. And you'd probably need some significant ad spend.
Yes.
To get it off the ground.
Yeah. So, and the reason I bring that up is when you talk about needing to do the Mindful Hunter once a week for a year, is yes, now, given the number of hunting podcasts or just podcasts in general that are out there, to really build that habit and solidify your share of your listeners' attention. I think you're right. If we'd gone back in time to say like 2015, when I started Beyond the Kill, you could probably, and we started bi-weekly. Right. And you probably could have backed that.
100%. But people's expectations were so different as well. Mm-hmm. And people's media consumption habits were so different that having access to something like even monthly, like all newsletters and even the good ones still are only monthly. Yeah. So I think that's okay. So we launched the MVP, we get product market fit, but now you actually need to fulfill the promise you've just made. Mm-hmm. So now what?
It's just figured it the fuck out, man. Like was, I knew some, and what I will say, throughout the history of the journal is, the generosity of people with their time, with their resources, like photos, and time goes into writing, but time to even talk to me in the first place. Like I didn't run into a single person that was like, nah, I'm not really interested. Not one. Right. So I could reach out and this was, again, social wasn't what it is today. So I'm hitting info at emails on websites and reaching out to like guides and outfitters and people like bigger personalities in the space and all this stuff. And there's certain stuff I was writing. Although I didn't put it, I didn't sign my name to our mountain fitness content because I wanted it to seem like we had like a big staff of writers.
Of course.
We didn't. I wrote, 90+% of the fitness related content. Was and still is a huge passion of mine. Like I know it is for you.
Yep.
Especially as it relates to, the mountains and the backcountry. But, I just found people to write. We would run usually one or two. We tried to do 2 subscriber stories a month. And that was generally pretty easy. People like to share their material. They like to kind of put something out there for, posterity, with a lot of editing that would go into that. I would source subject matter experts on whatever the topic is I wanted to cover. And then I would write the balance or find creative ways to fill in the balance. Boone and Crockett Club gave me access to all of their archives to turn into digital. for like stories that were only in print before, like just great, what turned into relationships in the industry. And then, from year to year, we might change the content based on what I saw as a need, or sometimes even just a trend that we wanted to be a part of or follow, and felt that we could. Like there was nothing. I don't think there's anything we've put out there content wise, and that's a very broad stroke statement. But I would feel confident saying that 90% of the stuff that we've put out is stuff we felt we could or should cover for our audience, and also either because we knew somebody who could speak to it intelligently, or we could ourselves. And as time wore on, and I brought more kind of guys into the fold, even if they were just subcontractors that did a handful of articles a year or helped us on the film and video stuff, whatever it might be. There was always we were talking about this offline, right? So, integrity was always important.
Right.
Now, and I want to be really clear on one thing here, because going back to 1.0, one of the only emails that came in, because there was like an info@journalofmountainhunting.com, was an angry email saying, who the hell's behind this? There's nothing about the team behind this and the person who has the credibility to put this out there and blah, blah, blah. I had quite a chuckle from that, because I think it speaks to what is, I don't know if I would call it a problem, but it's too much a part of this industry, this hunting industry, is that it's all about personalities.
Right.
And I know that's just part of it, and that's fine. But I never wanted the Journal of Mountain Hunting to be Adam's Hunting Journal.
Right.
I didn't know shit. Right. I'd grown up doing a lot of hunting. I'm pretty competent by and large when it comes to those sort of skills, but I had a lot to learn when it came to the mountains and mountain species. And this was really scratching my own itch to create a single source of information for me, and then hopefully other people that felt the same way. Hence the minimum viable product, or 1.0. And I've obviously learned a lot as time has gone on, and have transitioned into certain areas where I might know more than the average person. I had a lot of background in fitness and health and science and biomechanics and that sort of stuff. So I could cover that with confidence, and I will go toe to toe with anybody who wants to have that conversation with me in a debate fashion. But everything else was about just putting as much content out there for those that felt the same way I did, looking to learn or looking to, read a cool story, or historical account of some exploration, whatever it might be. It was never about like making a name for me. And if it wasn't for the podcast, I wanted to do it, and my name and voice is now associated with that. I probably would have done everything in my power to keep my name as far away from it as possible.
It's very interesting. I find the journal kind of fascinating, because it's, in a lot of ways, it's like the polar opposite of what Mindful Hunter is. Opposite isn't the right word though, because it still accomplishes the same goal. It just does it in a completely different way. And just like I try very hard to constantly qualify my qualifications, for lack of a better term. Like, I am not a Remy Warren. I'm not a Jim Shockey. I'm not one of these guys. Now, that being said, there are a couple key areas. Like for me, it's being in the mountains with 15 years of engineering. There's a couple areas where I too feel very confident going toe to toe. But I think the way I addressed what I thought would be a concern of my own integrity and authenticity is just to be upfront. This is me. This is my journey, and this is where I'm at. You went about it a different way. What I think is what makes it compelling, having people at our level doing it, is that I think we ask the right questions. I've listened to experts, and there's like this whole, as you know, behavioral science is kind of what I do for a living, but there's a whole expert bias. And you go from unconscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. That's the true elevation of expertise, to the point where you're so good at it, you don't actually think about it anymore. You just do it. Yeah. And I don't think those are the best people, unless they're being interviewed or led by somebody else, to actually teach people, because they're not in tune with it anymore. They've become so good at it that they don't understand the right questions to ask. And that's why I think there's space and there's room in this space for guys that aren't hardcore experts, because I think we're asking questions that guys just like us also want the answers to. Only we're saying, who do I got to go talk to? Because I don't know what the answer to this is, but I can go, we're lucky to know some people or whatever. We'll go find those answers for you.
Well, and it's like I was saying earlier, spot and talent, right? Well, that's talent to give a nudge to, or talent to interview and source information from, so I can learn. And in the context of the journal or the podcast, share that, right? Is that's really what it boils down to. And if I could describe, the journey in a nutshell, it is this, insatiable curiosity about this mountain hunting space, right? To at most levels, I can't say at all levels. There's parts of it that I'm just not as interested in.
Sure.
But at most levels, it's this insatiable curiosity about how do we get better? How do we do better? How do we think better? How do we act better? All these things. And I think you do a great job. I mean, job of that. It comes back to the mindful side of, your brand is that there's a lot that goes into this stuff. It's a pretty serious process, and there's some pretty serious shit on the line when you really go deep.
Yeah.
And go away for long periods. And look, anything can happen anywhere.
Sure.
I'm not trying to overstate, how serious this shit is, but there's a point where, you're crossing a threshold of an order of magnitude of difference from, backpacking for a weekend somewhere. And I got nothing against that. But there's, I do think that, coming back to what you're saying about people and experts, those that grow up with this, like I grew up with hunting. I didn't grow up with this hunting. They've done it for so long that they basically come to the point where they forget what it was like to learn and fail and get to where they are. Right. Yep. Like you said, you can pull those stories out of them, but it's not easy.
No, and you have to be intentional about it. And there's one insight I don't want to lose here, because I think it's important for the audience. And you noted with like a hint of surprise how open and how helpful people were, to the point that you don't think you got a single no. And I want to draw an analogy here between your experience and the new hunter and this kind of phenomenon. And that is, when you prove to individuals that you're committed and that you're willing to exert a tremendous amount of effort, it is astonishing what people will share with you.
Yeah.
And I think the younger generation of hunters, they're putting the cart before the horse. They ask the questions before they prove their commitment. I can't tell you, like, I'm about to put up my sheep hunt at the end of the week. I guarantee I'll get a half a dozen messages from like legit vets. It'll either be DMs or emails, and they'll either be, very compassionately correcting me on something that I did, or even offering me semi spots for next year or whatever the case is. But it's only because they'll have just watched me beat the shit out of myself with really like no idea what I was doing, but like kind of no idea what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if I can give advice to anybody in the space, it's like, go prove how important this is to you first, then go ask for help. And you did the same thing with Journal. Like, you built it, you showed the industry or our community what it was you were willing to put on the line, and then you asked people to participate.
Yeah.
And I think for most people, when they would have took one glance and been like, well, he did all of this before even asking me. Of course I want to be helpful, because you get that buy-in. And I think the same is true when people are learning to hunt. And I would urge people to keep that in mind. Do the work first, ask for the help second.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that for sure. And it's, this reminds me of some of the stuff I kind of hinted at this earlier. My uncles made me do as part of my sort of rites of passage to, being part of like the grown-ups when it came to hunting, right? Because I was, I had a gun in my hand pretty young, but that was staged and managed very, very stringently. Like, I wasn't allowed, I've said this on my podcast a bunch, but I wasn't allowed to shoot a scoped rifle until I could prove extreme proficiency with a lever action open sight 30-30, which was my grandfather's, which had a steel fucking butt plate for a recoil pad, recoil pad. And at like 13, we're shooting these moving targets that my uncles would set up on like this clothesline with like a motor. They're all farmers, so they could fix and do anything. We do this running. I'll finish the story now that I've started it. These running deer shoots, we would call them every fall before the deer season, because whitetails in the east, they're often being run behind dogs or pushed by hunters and whatever. So we put two guys on the line, this clothesline set up on this track with a little motor, and we'd have deer-sized cardboard cutouts, and they'd zip across at 50 yards. And we'd have this competition amongst, all my uncles, I had cousins that were around the same age as me. And then we'd usually bring in these sort of, friends and et cetera from the community. So we get, I don't know, 30 probably people out for these. And you had to put 3 shots into the moving deer target. Guy on the right gets target 1, guy on the left gets target 2. And we get down to finals and blah, blah, blah. So I had to prove my proficiency with that open sight lever gun before I was allowed to shoot a scoped rifle. And so
love it.
The point being, whether it's in the east or the west, I feel like there's just that there are rites of passage, right? Like there's, you gotta prove that you're not worthy, but you're into this before I think someone's going to really be generous with information or time, or maybe even some of their own stuff, like their own gear.
100%. Yeah. Okay. Watching time. And I don't want to knock it into this. When does Beyond the Kill become a thing? And what, maybe more importantly, what led you to the conclusion that the Beyond the Kill podcast should be created?
So first episode came out in November 2015. I had to check that last night and because I couldn't remember. But yeah, November 2015 was the first episode. I was and still am utterly obsessed with podcasts again myself. Since I first started listening to podcasts going back before that time, so we'll probably say late 2014, I guarantee I've listened to no more than an hour of radio in the past number of years. Like it's podcast. If I'm running or hiking, it's a podcast. If I'm puttering around at home and I'm not, with the kids, it's podcast. If I'm driving, it's podcast. Like I love them. So that's probably the easiest answer is I just love the medium. I think, going, not to get all when they're sort of philosophical, but the spoken word is the oldest form of communication. Well, sorry, next to like handprints, it is the oldest form of communication before we put like, hand carvings or paintings on walls. So I think it's got immense power. I think in this community, it speaks to something we all love, and that's time around the fire, right? Like sharing campfire stories. And also, from a business perspective, it was a medium I could add to the mix beyond what we were doing online via the magazine and then the newsletter, right? So, and it was an easy one for me to do because it was a microphone and figuring out how to edit and produce and all that sort of stuff. Whereas on the camera side of things, like photography and film,
man, podcasting is easier than YouTube. Like
exactly.
the barrier to entry to having a podcast is so unbelievably low. You could literally start one with your iPhone.
Yeah, exactly. So that was it. And again, had people I wanted to talk to, people I wanted to interview. I should include, we ran a column every month called Blazing Trail. And that was catered to interviewing trailblazers in our world. So I had Stephen Ranella, Jim Shockey, Kurt Roscoe from Stone Glacier, Dana from Mystery Ranch, Remy Warren, I'm forgetting names like not Brendan Burns, excuse me, Jason Harrison. Again, I reached out to all these people, no hesitation, would get on the phone with me for 2 hours.
See, that's something else you're not going to get these days, man.
Exactly.
You would find it, trust me, because I've a couple of those names on the list I've tried for the podcast. And it's not even like they're saying no. You're just not getting through the noise these days.
Exactly.
Whereas 5-6 years ago, I could see that because you're literally going to get like a real email address to someone's actual desktop computer.
Yeah. And every now and then I had to work an angle to get there, but you could get there. But anyways, I really enjoyed that. Yeah. But I would, record those, transcribe them myself, turn them into an article, edit, because you well know that spoken word and written word are not as close as we think they are.
No.
Turn those into an article form, question answer, almost like in a long form editorial in the Rolling Stone, and that would be an article. So that was
you're doing a podcast and turning it into an article.
Exactly.
And then so one day you're like, okay, well, this is stupid. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of work here in the middle that does not need to happen.
Each of those probably cost me, I would guess, at least 10 hours.
Sure.
Right. To include the interview time, the transcription, the editing, blah, blah, blah. And then when I found podcasts, I'm like, oh shit, I'm just going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, and I wanted to call it something different. I didn't want it to just be like the Journal of Mountain Hunting podcast. And I came up with the Beyond the Kill notion because it's something I believe in about hunting and conservation, in particular mountain hunting, that we do it for so much more than just killing.
But I like the fact that you didn't shy away, because this is like, I'm going to get on like a bit of a soapbox here in the next little with the words trophy hunting and killing and like even grip and grins, because I feel like there's this danger in our desire to not offend people outside of our community that we're losing the heart and soul of our community. Like, I don't harvest a deer. It doesn't grow in the ground like corn. I kill a deer, and like, yes, I have trophies in my house. Like, there's antlers over there. There's a bear rug over there. And those are trophies to me because I accomplished something incredibly hard and I want a memento to remember that. And that's okay. And I like grip and grins. Anyways, I'm not going to go, but that's the other thing that, like, it's a small nuance because you left the kill word in there. So it still has a little bit of bite to it, but because it's beyond the kill, you're being very clear that like, it's not just the kill we're here to talk about. And I think that kind of like, not quite a double entendre, but the way that there's dual meanings there, that's something else that really drove home that particular choice of words for me specifically.
No, and I appreciate that. And look, I mean, another way to think about it is, it is all about killing, right? Conservation is about keeping animals on the landscape so we can go and kill them.
Yep.
Being fit or mentally tough enough is about being able to go and kill something. But the whole point is, to be successful killing on a regular basis, self-guided. And I got nothing against being guided whatsoever. But going on a guided hunt and going out on your own are two different things.
Of course.
So, if the onus is on you to get it done, there's a lot you got to figure out to have consistent success. And so I didn't want the podcast to be, when I say the Journal of Mountain Hunting, it could be that it's all about, killing things. And it is, but Beyond the Kill allowed me the space to explore any aspect of the hunting community I wanted, or the hunting world I wanted to, obviously through the lens of mountain and backcountry stuff by and large. So yeah, and that's, and now fast forward to today, and maybe we can cap sort of things off on the journal front with this, is the podcast is far more the leader of what we do,
right?
The front of what we do. I mean, we have, I think it's 600 odd articles that were produced over, the 7 years. So, again, because of the timing, I don't have to do shit to rank very high in organic search. Like, I have had web people look at this and they're like, you literally can't do this anymore. You can't, you cannot put a price tag.
No, the depth of your backlinking and everything is insane.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, we can be less, written form focused,
right?
Because we have that backlog. And trust me,
it's just like working out, man. Building the house is much more difficult than maintaining the house.
Yeah.
And once you have that structure, like the regular maintenance and kind of upkeep is much easier than actually building it.
Yeah. I mean, there's more we could do there, more I probably should be doing there. But for a bunch of reasons we don't need to get into, how I've been allocating my time has been different the past 2.5 to 3 years.
Right.
So I've kind of had to pick my not battles, but pick my areas of focus and emphasis.
Yeah,
and the podcast has been it by and large.
Okay, listen, we could go on about this all day. And in fact, maybe we will do a round 2 once people digest this. I normally get some follow-up questions and stuff. And I, personally would like to know some more, but I also don't want to let you go without getting a bit of an update on how things went. So we both came home empty-handed this year. So like we can check the egos at the door. Yep. We both failed to kill a sheep. I knew when you were going, but I know nothing. Did you go with Wardo?
Yep.
So what happened?
Oh man. Well, let's start with this. So this is my first time going out for the opener.
Okay. See, and this is funny you say that, because I remember us talking last year and you being a die-hard fall guy and telling me like, listen, I'm going to tell you should go for the opener because that's when your best odds are. There's no other species open. So you're going to maintain focus on what you're there to do. But you specifically said, I can't stop myself from going in the fall. I love the colors. I love everything about Northern BC in the fall. So when we were chatting and you're like, yeah, I'm leaving next week, I was like, huh, interesting. Yeah. So yeah,
it kind of came together quick. So Wardo had been planning to hit an archery only zone in Region 6, which, you know, for those that know Region 6, won't take you much to figure it out, but I'll leave the name out of that.
Sure.
So he was planning to do that. And I had and have some projects for the journal happening this fall. One with Mystery Ranch, and then one that's a group of sponsors. We're doing a really cool project that I can't unfortunately share much about right now, but it'll be about sheep.
Cool.
So they were kind of like, we were trying to figure out like when, the where, the how, all this sort of stuff. So I hadn't really committed to an opener sheep hunt. I had committed to the same fly-in we did last fall. Unfortunately, the timing for the MR, the Mystery Ranch project, had to happen literally right before we were scheduled to fly into the same lake as last year, and just that much time away from home was not possible. My youngest son's starting school this year. I won't miss that for anything. So, you know, the old family scheduling thing, I had to drop that Northern BC hunt. And so I talked to Wardo and said, look, if you're not set on that bow zone, I'll absolutely go sheep hunting with you, but it's got to be rifle. And he's like, yeah, hell yeah. I don't really care about the bow area. I just want to go and see a bunch of sheep. So we whipped together a very loose plan. And I know we're getting tight on time, so I maybe won't share all of that part of it, but he had his dates set. I was able to make those dates work for me. And we drove north and we decided to do a hike in off a highway.
Yeah.
and yeah, give it a go. And I had that was the hardest hunt I've ever been on. Like, I mean, not even there's nothing in the same fucking league, dude. Like my worst day in Tajikistan when I was like eating shit from altitude. Yeah. We topped out just shy of 17,000 feet when I killed my ibex.
Oh, that's crazy.
Which is high.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's people out there who can do fine with it. I did not do fine with altitude. I was beat to the ground. And I wasn't, my worst day in Tajikistan was probably my best day on this Northern BC hunt.
Wild.
Like it was just, it was tough. The heat absolutely smoked us. Interestingly, listening to your podcast this morning when I was out for a run, I can't remember the other guy's name. I started it with a sinus infection. The day I woke up, had a sore throat kick in. I was like, this maybe won't turn into anything, you know, whatever, a bunch of different supplements trying to knock it back with, an immune response. Well, the day we hiked in, I was just fucked, like concrete in my sinuses. I like just mouth breathing the entire way. It was north of 30 degrees Celsius. Our packs were too heavy. I don't know how many times on this trip I thought about Clay when he talked to you saying, I don't care who you are, you get over 70 pounds and it beats you down. Yeah. And unless
trust me, I know all about it, bro.
Yeah. Well, dude, I listened to what your weight was going into this hunt. That's a whole other subject, by the way.
Yeah.
But I mean, it just beat the shit out of us. So like, not to make it a big thing, but I usually get like one bad sinus infection a year and it like knocks me out. Like I'm in bed, need antibiotics, despite the fact I, tried to avoid it. And this was one of those, but there was no fucking quit, right?
Yeah.
It was, I considered it. The second morning I turned to Wardo and was like, dude, real talk. if this gets any worse, we're gonna have to do something here. Like whether it's pull out, get antibiotics, and pick a new spot and just make the best of it, or I go out and you keep hunting and I rest for a couple of days and try and find you. Blah, anyways, we had that chat and we just kept going. And I think actually keeping going helped me process the sickness quicker. But it was a struggle. So I was far from tip-top shape. The heat was a crusher, and then water.
Yeah,
water
such brutal this year, man. Brutal,
dude. We were dropping 2,200 feet every other day just to get water. Yeah, and so it ground us down. So we had chosen a route in to this spot. We hike up into the Alpine. And I think you said something similar to this yourself in your post hunt sort of debrief. If there had been rams where we went, we would have seen them. Yeah. And so we decided to move. And this is the beauty of where we were, is we could hike back out to the truck, have a regroup night, and cross the other side of the highway and hike into a totally different area. Like you drive for I would love to know, map out that distance, but you can basically pick a drainage and you can find stones. Yeah. So we had no shortage of opportunities. It was just a matter of you're burning time to do it. And long story long, we eventually find some rams, and made the tough decision that although we could get to them, we were not very confident in our ability to extract under load and underweight safely. It was, no fall terrain might be exaggerative. There were sections that were certainly no fall terrain. And between how I was feeling and both of us, but more me, because I started, in basically deficit. Wardo was, he was strong as shit throughout, but, we both started to get pretty beat down. And we just made the decision that, no rams are worth a really bad injury or worse. And
even more important, like, I respect this decision and the decision process, and we can, I've had a couple of stories come through of that situation and then other questionable age situations. And I like how Ranella describes it as lust. And the fact that you were able to be objective beyond the lust. And this may sound funny, but even more importantly than like an injury on the way to get a ram is an unrecoverable ram. That to me is even more disrespectful. Right. Like if you think you can get there and then you fall on the way, I'm like, well, you were wrong, but you made an educated decision and I respect your decision. But if you literally can't get there and you shoot the animal anyways and be like, oh, we'll figure it out later, that to me is like pretty big no-no. Yeah. So good on you, man, because that's not an easy call, especially after you get your shit pushed in for 7, 8, 9, 10 days straight. You know what I mean? Like you're looking for a yes.
Yeah. Well, and dude, and I'll fully admit, for the week to 10 days after coming back, I wasn't sure whether I was good with the decision or if I felt like a complete and total fucking pussy. Yeah. That came up with excuses for not pushing past that.
That's why it's a bitch of a decision.
Yeah.
Because there's no like honorable, there's no like noble out. You're basically saying like, I'm in Kate, there's no easy out, man. You don't get a pass on that one. You got to own that one. No. And the only, and it's funny, I had this little mini revelation on my hunt. I don't mean to butt in, but like the longer I hunt and the deeper I go and the harder I go, the less failure I feel when I don't kill. And I come out feeling okay. I still, and this would be an interesting podcast for a later date, but I still go through about a week of depression when I get home. That's like legit. Like I'm finding it hard to just do daily things after I get home, but I don't have that sense of like crushing defeat. The depression is from something completely elsewhere, but it's that doing this long enough and being in enough situations and having that confidence in yourself that like, I don't need to prove anything to anyone. That's what allows you to make decisions. And you're a good guy. You're always going to second guess yourself, but it's only that experience and that confidence that will allow you to make the decision that you made and know it's the right decision in the moment, or at least have a high degree of probability, because it's never a fact. It's always going to be a matter of opinion, but at least feel confident that it's most likely the right decision in that time and place.
Yeah, and as time has gone on now, because we're almost 3 weeks since I got back, I think.
Yeah.
I feel better and better about the decision. Yes. Because without getting into the details, where we spotted the rams from didn't really allow for a good approach. So we ended up hiking back out the drainage, second time now back to the truck, restock our water again, and tried to get at them from a different drainage, which afforded a smaller mountain between this big valley.
Okay.
So we could get a closer look. And that was like, really, that's the summary of the trip. Is I sent you that pic.
Yeah.
We saw 2, possibly 3, very likely legal, and 2 of them certainly legal on curl. But I wanted to get a closer look from the standpoint of age. And that's the part that probably burns me as much as anything. Is I would have been perfectly fine if we'd made it to that spot we'd planned to get to, which would have the distance from where we'd glassed them the day before, get that closer look and have a more confident idea of age, and said, nope, they're not old enough for us.
Right.
Totally. I would have come home great. Disappointed, but great.
Yeah.
The fact that we couldn't even get to that point, and terrain assessment was a big part of that. And sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. When we left that glassing spot the day before and we hiked out, we followed a sheep trail out, which was really the only decent way out. And there was at least a half dozen times where we looked down and we're like, if you slip, you're fucked. Like, this is not like, oh yeah, like I'm exaggerating, making me sound like a badass. I'm not. Like, I've done some cool shit. And this was as puckered as I've been on a mountainside. And then add the weight of a ram, if not potentially 2 rams. And it gets sketchy. And then, coming back to the decision process, Wardo turns to me at one point. He's like, dude, we can't do 2. If we're going to get there, we can't do 2. So you're up. You've been after this for far longer than I have, full, obviously, credit to Wardo for that. But we made a lot of really good decisions. They still hurt, they still burn, but there was no easy way to them, one, but certainly back. And not that any stone sheep is easy to get to. But it was not just about putting the head down and one boot in front of the other. This was,
and it doesn't help that they were, I'm not going to say they were questionable, but that was not like a sign.
This wasn't, like
that's a full, you needed to get closer to verify. Like it was definitely, and at the distance you were, I don't even want to say it was borderline. You just simply did not have enough information to make that call. It was definitely promising enough that it was like, oh, we want another look.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it was not by any stretch of the imagination, oh, we're done. That's a shooter.
That's a hammer. We need to go now.
And that affects you. Like you can't help, like that affects your mindset when you know from the outset that like, we want to think that regardless of whether or not we know it's a shooter, we're going to be just as committed and all the rest. But the fact of the matter is that we're human beings, and all of that stuff plays on your psychology and how motivated you are. And again, it's like, it's almost like a little bit of like a math teeter totter, and you have like all these little points, and it's like the little justice scales are tipping one way and then the other, you know what I mean?
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And there's no perfect answer. Here's the thing. At least you chased a ram. Like we didn't even have that.
Yeah.
That was my only regret. Like literally, I won't say only, like it took us 5 days to walk into a place that should have taken 1. That shouldn't happen, but whatever. Fuck, move on. Came home in good shape. But all I wanted was to glass some like legit rams. That was like, I didn't even care if I couldn't shoot them. Like a band of 7-year-olds would have rocked my world.
Yeah.
We saw that one mini-band that one night, and I didn't even really get to see them. One of them for 5 seconds in a pair of 15s. So it's like, I didn't see horn. I didn't like nothing. And that was, that's the only thing that left a bad taste in my mouth. It was like, I just wanted to see some legit rams with some like horn. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And Mordo, like this was almost worth the trip alone, is when I found that band. So there was, I think, 8 rams in it, 1 banana. And then 2 very likely legal, again, needed to be aged to verify shooter status. And then another 4 or 5 of up and comers.
Yeah.
Right. Like my first picture or my first spot was through the binos at 3K away. And because it was so hot, every ram we saw was literally on the peak of the highest point of every mountain. There was no coming from the top, right? There was 0 coming from the top on these rams, every ram we saw. And so I'm glassing across and I just see these humps over top of the mountaintop, right? So I'm like, oh shit, I gotta have a closer look at the spot. I get up, I'm like, gut rams. And for the next day, because we just watched them for this whole time frame, Wardo, I should have pulled out my phone and just set it beside me on record, because listening to his commentary on looking at them and his excitement, it was so cool, man. It was, I mean, for sure the best band of rams I've seen on a sheep hunt. So I was excited. I'm not trying to say I wasn't, but Wardo, that's all he wanted really when he was going to go to the bow zone. He did not expect to kill anything. He just wanted to look at sheep, pattern sheep, watch their behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. And he got that from this trip. And I'm really, really happy that we had that outcome. And it was, coming back to the hardest trip ever, the other part of it is I learned so much on this trip. And I always learn. As I said earlier, I think I'm a pretty naturally curious dude. But I learned a lot on this trip. And I'd gotten, I think complacent would be too negative a word, but pretty comfortable with hunting in the fall. I didn't have to think about my kit or my food a whole lot. I just did what I did and was pretty comfortable. This really changed a lot of my thinking on gear, nutrition, just general tactics as far as how I approach a climb, ferrying loads, pre-scouting routes, dropping a pack, pre-scouting routes, all this stuff that I just didn't really apply much in the past. So it was amazing in that regard as well.
Yeah, I felt like I had a very rich learning experience myself. There's lots of takeaways and, things to simmer on and chew on for a little while. Yeah. Listen, man, it kind of breaks my heart here, because I feel like there's so much more that I want to get into, but we both have stuff going on. So we're going to wrap it up here. To everybody listening, if you got any more questions for Adam, please let me know, and we'll do a round 2 of this at some point in the near future. Any way you can engage with this content, I would deeply appreciate it. Likes, comments, subscriptions. If you need to get a hold of me, jay@mindfulhunter.com, or you can DM me on Instagram, mindful_hunter. You've heard the names bandied around a lot during the podcast, but obviously the website is journalofmountainhunting.com and the podcast is Beyond the Kill. I can't recommend both of them enough. If you're into my stuff, odds are there's at least going to be some of the content that those guys put out. We didn't even bring up Nolan, and he deserves an honorable mention because he's a big part of the Beyond the Kill. And I've been lucky enough to have kind of some interactions with him, and I'm going to try and get him on at the end of his guiding season as well. But he's a big force behind the Beyond the Kill and a really good voice in BC hunting. So I'm really glad we could do this, man. And again, I know you don't want it, but I sincerely thank you. Even though it took a bit of a weird turn, the kind of inspiration to get me to start the podcast, it's been a game changer for me. So I deeply appreciate you coming on, and I deeply appreciate the impact that you have.
My pleasure, man. And thanks for bringing up Nolan, because he's been carrying the load on the podcast and the journal for the last couple of years for sure. And he's more than my right-hand man on that stuff. And so, for those who don't know who Nolan is, @Nemo, @NMO on the IG. And if you listen to any of our podcast episodes, you'll probably stumble across Nolan hosting quite a few of them as well.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Cheers, dude.